Thank you, everyone. I want to make sure that I say hello to any colleagues in Ireland who are joining us virtually. Hello. I'm not going to be able to take you through pop culture references from Ireland in 2005 because at that point in my life I had never been to Ireland and I had no idea how much time I was going to be spending there. But I will take you on a bit of the journey of Athena Swan in Ireland. So back in 2013, colleagues at Trinity College in Dublin began to scope the potential for an Athena Swan framework in Ireland. And some of those early key conversations, mainly with Sarah Dickinson-Hyams, really stressed the importance of making sure that there was a sector-wide approach, that it wasn't just one institution driving the work. So that's exactly what happened in a major national initiative supported by the Higher Education Authority. We rolled out an Athena Swan Ireland pilot. And like the UK, it began with that emphasis on female academics working in STEM. But over the years, the Charter expanded its remit in Ireland, and we had a kind of phase of capacity building, and the Charter expanded to look at all disciplines, all staff working in higher ed, and to think about gender equality more broadly. But in 2020, after 5 years of the Athena Swan Charter in Ireland, it was felt that there was maybe a refresh needed. So we launched a development plan that was really driven by some national consultation that we undertook, mainly through a survey with the sector, but also a series of engagement events with institutions and departments. And at the end of last year, we launched a new charter framework. If you want to read in more detail about the kind of history and origin story of Athena Swan in Ireland, I'd recommend this article by Professor Eileen Drew, that colleague at Trinity that I mentioned a moment ago, Navigating Uncharted Waters, Anchoring Athena Swan into Irish HEIs. We have a really similar context in Ireland that has been kind of spoken about throughout today. This driver, this lack of women in senior roles in our institutions. And Ross showed you the scissor pipeline that we had when the pilot began. And I'm glad that he showed the updated data with the improved figures. I think when talking about Athena Swan in Ireland, it's really important to look at that link to funding, that link to research funding that was announced. This is certainly a driver that we wanted to dig into a little bit more as a part of our consultation with the sector. And you can see the increase in the engagement with the application process when that link to research funding was announced. So you see this growth in applications, but that's not the only thing that we would attribute to engagement with the Charter, of course, and part of this growth is about how we kind of structure that top-down framework of institutions starting with applying for awards and then departments applying after that. But as I said, we wanted to dig into this in our sector consultation that we carried out in 2020. So in that consultation, we asked about perceptions of Athena Swan at institutional level, and we wanted to look at the data based on those who are directly involved in the Charter, so people who were on self-assessment teams, analyzing data, maybe responsible for particular actions, and then also those who responded to the consultation but weren't directly involved in the Charter, so people who are just working in those institutions. And we found that among those who are involved, they reported that the link between research funding eligibility and Athena Swan plays an important role in my institution's commitment to gender equality. So they're more likely to strongly agree with that statement compared to those who are not involved, which I thought was really interesting and kind of surprised me. But we also asked about other things around Athena Swan helping to raise awareness. And although it wasn't an impact review, we also captured some findings around kind of revising policies as a result of the Athena Swan process. I thought that this EDI practitioner put the funding link in really interesting context. So we had this really rich qualitative data set from the consultation, but they said it's created an external pressure, mainly due to the funding link, that the institution can't ignore. As the institution responds to this pressure by making changes, for example, changing membership composition of academic council, revising promotion criteria to account for periods of leave, the culture and environment are beginning to change. Old attitudes and ways of doing things are being questioned. I feel the funding link probably needs to be maintained for a while for this evolution to reach a tipping point. And as I said, although it wasn't an impact review, we had a lot of responses around changes as a result of Athena, Swan, and qualitative feedback. And a lot of this focused on that increased awareness of the issues around gender equality among staff, leading to greater visibility and discussion. As I mentioned, also kind of new policies, procedures, and practices as well. We also wanted to make sure that we reflected on some of the barriers experienced, and Danny alluded to these as well, that issue with additional workload, the complexity in capturing data, and also just internal cultural barriers as well. A female member of a senior management team in one of our institutes of technology also, I think, outlined the global context, but also some particular national context in Ireland. She said, staff are having many additional pressures as a result of COVID-19, and this has created challenges for us in trying to progress our work, such as getting data from different units. Another issue relates to the fact that EDI professionals in the sector at the moment are very stretched, and many of us are working on other high strategic time-consuming initiatives. Sally, that Ross talked about earlier in the consent framework. I think this is a really important point to underline is EDI professionals are often stretched, and we wanted to make sure that we had a charter that recognized this workload, tried to address it, but also made sure that we were aligning our activity to all of the work already happening in Ireland that kind of complements and helps drive the impact of Athena Swan. So if I were to kind of distill the aims of the new framework and what we learned from that consultation is we want to make sure that we have an Ireland framework that drives impactful and sustainable gender equality work, but also begins to build capacity in evidence-based interventions across additional equality grounds enshrined in Irish legislation. And I think this stems from a couple of places. One, wanting to make sure that we're still using the same framework to look at other equality challenges, but also make sure that we are thinking about equality in an intersectional way. And there's just a lot of foundational work needed in Ireland to do that. We also want to make sure that the charter fully includes professional, managerial, and support staff at all levels of award. And again, that there's an alignment with the priorities of higher education in Ireland and also beyond. So also looking at that EU context and kind of the alignment to gender equality action plans for Horizon Europe. One thing that I think has been kind of tricky to balance with the new charter framework is making sure that we have an effective progressive charter that holds institutions to account, but as Danny mentioned, also reduces the administrative burden. So one thing we did was look at all of the data sets that we ask for and kind of rationalize those and think about how institutions and departments can prioritize that work. But we also tried to make sure that we built the consideration of resourcing, workload distribution, and recognition within the application process itself. So we have a new section around the governance of EDI work, and then this is aligned to the criteria for an award. And then just the final point I want to make before I hand over to Erin is also this point around that's come up a few times today. There's that kind of institutional-wide activity, but also what's happening kind of from the bottom up as well in departments. And we wanted to make sure that the two application forms talk to each other a little bit better. So having, central gender equality and wider equality action plans that work across an institution, but then departments are able to really focus on exploring discipline-specific issues and also kind of looking at their own local cultures and building on the institutional framework that's already in place. So I will leave it at that and hand over to you, Erin.